All right. I think we're going to get started as more people trickle in from lunch. Good afternoon and good evening to those of us joining online. I'm Alice Obrecht. I'm the head of research at LNAP, which is the Global Humanitarian Learning Network. And we're delighted to be here, and many thanks to the World Bank and the organizing team at the Fragility Forum Partnership Day for giving us the space for this session today to talk about two very important aid reform agendas. So the first being the so-called humanitarian-development-peace nexus agenda, which is sought to break down silos in international cooperation, particularly in fragile contexts, and which we've been hearing quite a bit about over the past few days at the Fragility Forum and at the Partnership Day today. And then the other reform agenda, which I have to say we haven't been hearing a whole lot about this week so far, which is called by some people the localization agenda, the locally led movement, or the decolonization of aid movement, which is sought to rectify and change longstanding and deeply entrenched power imbalances in the aid and development finance sectors. Somewhat surprisingly, these two reform agendas have been pursued largely in parallel. And to give you a quantitative figure to put to that gap, LNAP, at our organization, we do a lot on evaluation and research synthesis, and we carried out an evaluation synthesis of HDP nexus evaluations, which we published last December. This covers evidence from 90 different evaluations, and out of all of that, only 4% of the nexus initiatives that were evaluated had a localization theme or lens or focus on local leadership. So it is clearly a gap. And in our more recent work, where we've been doing a mapping of nexus approaches at the country level for the IASC, we carried out separate surveys with members of the international community and local and national NGOs, and have seen in the early stages of coming together and pulling that data together, quite very diverging in different perspectives on what the nexus actually means when you talk to national and local civil society and international humanitarian development and peace actors. So the aim of our session today is really to try and bridge this gap by looking at HDP nexus issues from the perspective largely of local leaders and understand how support for local actors can be broken out of our very familiar aid sector silos. And we're also bringing in the perspective of private philanthropy, which has been doing this in innovative and interesting ways that we can then learn from. Before we get started in a moment, I just want to draw your attention to a QR code and link that's going to be shared by my colleagues. This is for a resource page that we've pulled together of essential reading on thinking and approaches that address local leadership specifically across the HDP nexus. So bringing together these two themes, and it includes pieces from all of our speakers and our co-organizing partner for this session, the IFRC. It also includes a very aptly titled report by the Somalia Nexus platform that was shared with us by the NEAR network called Enough Theory! And I think that's probably the best title for any publication on the Nexus that you could have. And that's exactly what we hope to do today, move from the theory of new mechanisms and approaches of the Nexus to how this is actually playing out in reality. So we're going to jump straight into discussion now because we only have 1 hour and 5 excellent speakers, and we hope to have some time for questions and also your comments and reflections around the room and online. I would say if you are interested in asking a question or commenting online in the discussion section, that you post your hand or use the raise hand function, please. So I'm grateful to be joined today by Mr. Nahum Maiga, the Secretary General of the Mali Red Cross National Society, especially at such an unsociable hour in Mali. Thank you so much, Mr. Maiga. Similarly, for Dr. Wafa Mohammed Al-Madhaji's engagement with us today, who's calling in from Yemen, also a very unsociable hour. Dr. Wafa is the fundraising and partnership manager for ABS Development Organization for Women and Children, and the team lead of the Nexus Yemen Initiative. We're also joined online by Ms. Hodan Ali, who is the Senior Policy Advisor for Health and Social Services in the Office of the President of the Federal Government of Somalia. And here joining us in the room are Ms. Hibak Kalfan, who is the CEO of the NEAR Network, and Patricia McCleary. I even checked your surname pronunciation, and I got it. Yeah, McElreevy, President and CEO for the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. Great. So starting with you, Secretary General Maiga, I'd like to start with the Mali context, which has come up a few times this week. International engagement in Mali has looked quite different since the military coup in 2020. It'd be great to hear from your perspective, what impact has this had on the role and relationships between the Mali Red Cross Society and international development, peace, and humanitarian donors and agencies? And where are you seeing the strategic gaps?
Thank you very much, Elise, for this opportunity. I think the humanitarian situation in Mali has not started with the 2020 coup d'etat. It started 8 years before with the military, the armed group coming into the country and overtaking 2/3 of the country. That has engendered a lot of displacement, internal displacement in the country. So the 2020 coup d'etat has only aggravated the situation, because with that coup d'etat, international donors, European countries have stopped their collaboration with the military junta, which has brought about a lot of misery, because the country is almost being most of the funds come from the international donors, and for the international donors and European country to stop their assistance to the country, that has really aggravated the humanitarian situation. Now, with this situation, right now we have more than 3 million people under severe malnutrition and acute food insecurity. We have all these, also we have IDPs, we have internal displaced people, we have more than 2 million internal displaced people. And we have also those communities who have not been able to displace, but to move, but which are in a more dire situation than the internal displaced people, because they have lost all their livelihoods, then their means of existence, they have lost everything. And they're also under the control of these so-called jihadist armed group who are trying to impose the Sharia law on these communities. So the situation is really dire. It started in 2012 and has been aggravated in 2020 with the coup d'etat. Now we have also the embargo that has been imposed on the country, not just by the international the international organizations and the Western countries, but also by the ECOWAS, which is the West African Regional Economic Organization, that has also imposed for more than a year a complete embargo on the, and knowing that the country is a landlocked country, it's very difficult for the country right now. Now, the problem is that, as I said, 2/3 of the country is under the with this armed group, and the population is in a very difficult situation. So what happens is that right now there is no aid coming to the country, almost none, and what we have is a few assistance that is coming, but it's only for the emergency. So the population, we live day by day. People live day by day, because all the assistance that is here that we get is just emergency assistance. Now the Red Cross, our methodology is to link emergency aid with development, but the rare funds that we have, it's only for emergency. So we don't have room to link our emergency with the development. And we don't have also the funds to make sure that we also link social cohesion, peace building with the emergency assistance that we provide. So in terms of gap, also we have the situation that we need really to empower the local actors, because we have we have some international organizations that have pulled out from after the UN peacekeeping mission has been ousted. So international organizations have pulled out from the country. And so it remains only the Red Cross in the area to provide.
Secretary General? We lost Secretary General Maiga, unfortunately. Might see if we can get him back. Be excellent to hear the rest of that. I think we might wait or move on while we wait for Secretary General Maiga's connection to resume. Maybe I'll just pick up on what he's talking about and go to you, Ms. Ali, to kind of connect some of these strands, as I'm sure a lot of what Secretary General Maiga is talking about will also resonate from your perspective in the Somalia context. So one of the issues that's come up a few times in different panels this week is that when we talk about the HDP nexus and these silos, we talk a lot about the silos in international partners that can undermine state building, but there's also silos in government with different ministries holding different functions and not always coordinating well with one another. From your standpoint, are silos within government ministries a problem? And what are the strategic gaps you're seeing across the international ministry?
I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Sorry. Well, we'll go back to Secretary General Maiga then. Oh, and then we've got double of you, which is great. Yeah, sorry. Go back, Secretary General Maiga. If you could finish your thoughts, and then we'll go back to Ms. Ali for her reflections.
Yeah, so I was just saying that to wrap up that we really need the funding to complement the emergency funds that we get, in terms of implementing peace and social cohesion activities. We also need funds to implement also development activities, because some of the displaced, they have moved to areas where they're going to stay for long. They have been there for now 10 years. So there needs to be a way of providing them assistance so that they can build their livelihood, because they cannot live forever on emergency assistance. And also some other organization. I know that you're saying that you're being also funded by the World Bank. And in Mali, the World Bank is only collaborating directly with the government. And now, since the government they have this situation, so we really think that it would be important that also the World Bank had a way of also collaborating with organizations like the Red Cross, who are on the ground. We have the people. We have more than 8,000 volunteers on the ground in areas where even the government is not there, and other organizations, as I said, have pulled out as a consequence of the withdrawal of the UN peacekeeping mission. So this is really what I would like to say. So these are also the gaps that we have in terms of humanitarian assistance on the ground. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Secretary General Maiga. And just to connect that to some of the things we've heard this week, what you're talking about there, I think the phrase I've heard from some World Bank colleagues is politically constrained environments, which is a really interesting phrase, such as Mali, and the kind of approach there of trying to not create these parallel systems alongside government, which tend to be occurring through partnership with other international agencies like UN or the ICRC. And what you're saying is also, can we consider working more directly with civil society or non-state actors like the National Red Cross Society? So again, a different approach that could be further developed and pursued. I want to go to Ms. Ali, again, for your reflections on what Secretary General Maiga has been talking about, and this piece that I mentioned around silos also within the government, how much of that is an issue that you see from your perspective in the government of Somalia?
Good afternoon, everyone from Maryland. I was hearing some comments in the back before. Thank you for having me, and greetings to everyone. I maybe start off with giving a shout out to the enough theory we had referenced before. I think really touches the heart of maybe how I want to approach the conversation today. As you all know, Somalia has really been in conflict over 3 decades and just emerging from that conflict. And throughout that time, our institutions have really almost dissolved. And we've been spending the last decade rebuilding those institutions from literally from zero. But we've had quite a bit of a success. There are challenges, absolutely, but there has been successes that we've had that has led to debt relief, that has led to lifting the arms embargo, that has led to Somalia joining the East Africa community in December of 2023. But having said that, there are definitely challenges intergovernmentally in terms of collaboration and coordination and siloed work. And that probably is to be expected given where the country is coming from. And as we move forward towards, the next iteration of the government in terms of 2024 and beyond, it really is focused on trying to align ministerial work with the National Development Plan. Is that easy? No, but I think the efforts are there. What we are seeing right now, because of the siloed work, and really it's commensurate with a government in a country that is coming out of such prolonged system, that system didn't exist, but now it's getting back into using these systems to actually run the governments in the country across the board. So what we do see really are lack of coordination. Some ministries would pursue their own agendas in terms of what they think the ministry should be doing without really having it in line with the broader government objectives and the development plan for the government. This, sometimes will lead to issues around resource allocation because of just the constraints, economical environment that Somalia is in, and that much of the resources that we do get is from partners trying to spend those monies wisely and in coordination with other ministries would definitely help the development of a robust national agenda and interventions. Because of that, we do see fragmented service deliveries from within the federal government, but also across the different regional governments. So as you know, Somalia is a federal system, and we have regional governments that are act independently and supposed to be delivering services for their regions, but obviously in collaboration with the federal government. And that also, because of just the challenges in terms of the political constraints that exist in Somalia, also leads to further silos and fragmentation of service delivery. And I mean, by virtue, the result of that is, the inability to really robustly implement policies that are national policies that translate into regional policies because of the lack of robust communication between governments. Obviously, that impacts, not just ministerial work, but it translates into the lack of access to health services, to education, obviously to security. Somalia's poverty index, as we all know, is quite high. Many of the metrics that we look at, though improving, are not where they need to be. And much of that is because of the lack of sort of clear sort of way of communicating and sharing information and collaborating and putting the national agenda together, but also the challenges within, not just within the government, but the coordination with partners and donors and the rest. So that's sort of, maybe I'll stop there, but our own internal governmental issues on top of the challenges that we have trying to manage such a diverse portfolio of international partners within the country.
Thank you. Yes, and it's a huge capacity drain actually on government to be trying to partner across those silos, as you've pointed out. Thank you so much. I want to turn now to Yemen and Dr. Ahmad Haji. You lead a civil society organization there where you've seen a number of challenges in the silos of the aid industry, and so much so that you've started the Nexus Yemen Initiative, which is a campaign that tries to get humanitarian development and peace actors to join up their work more effectively. I presume since you have a very busy day job already in your work that this must have been quite a big challenge or a major issue for you to take on a second job effectively to advocate to internationals on how they need to link up better. So could you tell us a bit about why you felt compelled to advocate on Nexus issues specifically, and where do you want to see the international community doing better in Yemen?
Thank you for inviting me today. Regards to everyone in the rooms and in the calls. As a leader of Yemen Nexus initiative that has been established during 2021, it was during COVID outbreak and the Yemen conflicts and the limited funding. This challenge has inspired us to establish this initiative, where we noticed that we implementing it in our intervention. I want to give you one of the examples is that how we practice Nexus in WASH intervention, which was a humanitarian responses and funded by DKH, where IDPs and host communities were in conflict because of water source and clean water. So when we do a focus group discussion, we realized that the problem was because of the clean water. So we do modification to the activities, and we do serve the both community by doing water network rehabilitations and piping. And when we do this, the problem has been resolved and the social cohesion has been done. To increase the sustainability of the project, we established the community committee where we train them to monitor and maintain. And when we do the exit strategy, we rely on the community participation to ensure sustainability, to pay small fee to get clean water. And from the collected fee, the incentive has been paid for the incentives for the community committee and maintenance of the station to be covered. So I could say that the station is working till now since 2020. And other experiments was during the health outbreak by implementing also a safety council that depend on participation between different stakeholders, starting from community leader, local authorities, and CSO. Because of that, the initiative has been designed, focused in 3 pillars, which is a research-based knowledge on Nexus practice at the ground, community engagement and accountability, and the 3rd pillar was on community capacity building. And we believe that by integrated HBD Nexus effort, we could address immediate needs of affected population by building resilience, promote social cohesion, aligning foundation and sustainability, development, and peace. And here I want to give 3 recommendations or messages to be addressed. The first recommendation that supporting Yemen initiative as the limited fund is one of the constraints that limit the deliverable. The second recommendation is to the INGO and UN committee that Nexus is based on collaborative action and civil society, and Nexus Yemen initiative is coming from the field. So sharing information, aligning strategy, joint planning, implementation, intervention are required. By working together, we can ensure that our efforts are complementary, we avoid duplication, and we maximize the impact of our intervention. Also, by empowering local actors, we ensure that response in Yemen is continuously relevant, sustainable, and owned by the community themselves. Third recommendation, during my consultation meetings and advocating through the initiative, one of the main challenge and frequent questions that we are always facing, who is supporting this initiative? Which donor is behind it? HSCT or UN are involved. When they realize that it is self-funded and started with ADO Yemen, which is a woman-led organization who is leading this initiative, they lose their interest to collaborate more. And we hope this initiative will gain much more interest to much more stronger, because we are the actors in the grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad Haji. Could you repeat the first recommendation, if you don't mind? Because it was just a bit difficult on the sound. to fully hear you on the first recommendation.
Yeah, for the first recommendation, it's also related to the third recommendation, because they are always challenge that who is behind this initiative, and it's a self-funded. So the recommendation was to support Yemen Nexus initiative, as the limited fund is one of the constraints. And also, if there is someone legal behind it, that will be more stronger and more deliverable to the community and to the local, to the actors, different actors who are working in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good, clear, concrete recommendations. I'm going to turn now to our two colleagues in the room, starting with Hibak. So you're the CEO of the NEAR Network, which is a global network of national NGOs. Can you talk about what your members are grappling with when it comes to doing HDP Nexus work, and sort of from your bird's eye view on this at the global level, what needs to change in international agencies to make HDP Nexus efforts more locally led?
Thanks. Look, I grapple with this concept of nexus because does anybody in the world think about in silos where they're going to get their food, where their kids are going to go to school, where they're going to get healthcare, who's going to build their roads? Nobody thinks about this in silos as an individual. Yet, as an international aid system, we think about it in silos. And so the reality is this is all about power. The conversation about silos and HDP Nexus for local actors, local actors do not live in a world of nexus, right? Well, we have 250 members, and in our membership, nobody started working in their communities because of aid that existed. They started working in the education sector because they wanted to improve it, the health sector because they wanted to improve it, the humanitarian sector because there was an emergency in their country. But very little of our members work in silos. 66% of our members work across all three, and 33% work 2 out of the 3. So that's a clear indication for us out of our membership that this silo doesn't exist. Even specifically, we had one of our members from Wasta in Somalia recently at the Humanitarian Exchange, and he said, my organization works in food security when the community needs food. We work in agriculture when we're thinking about long-term sustainability. We work in conflict resolution when there's a conflict in the community. So it's really, really clear. The one thing that boggles my mind really is this idea of localization is the glue. It's not a silver bullet, because the reality is that's even a politicized conversation, and that's something that hasn't moved forward necessarily in the last 6 or 7 years. And so really, this question is for a centralized system of international actors. Do you want to break down this silo? Do you want to work together? Do you want to coordinate better? Because local actors would rather not say what Dr. or Secretary General Maiga said, which is, I go to a donor and they say, I'm not going to give you money because you're working on X and you're not working on Y. Or you can only work on X versus working on Y. So for me, it's really about thinking about this from, we need to fix a centralized system, a centralized aid system. And the only way we can think about this from a transformative perspective is to think about decentralized approaches that are coming from communities and coming from local actors, whether that's civil society or government or whoever, but the decisions should be made locally and the solutions exist locally. If I just talk about, I think, some recommendations, I think if we're talking about a centralized approach and we're talking about fixing a centralized approach, the international system reforms that I've seen are only incremental, and they're only things that can happen, I think, without, as they say, we have members who are always talking about this idea of decolonization and breaking down the system and removing the system because it's no longer fit for purpose. But from an incremental perspective, I think somebody pointed this out, coordination. I think both Wafa and Hoden mentioned that. We need better coordination and complementarity. The World Bank and international NGOs and the UN agencies, as an example, in Somalia, they all have the same back donors. The multi-donor trust fund is all the same back donors that fund the international NGOs, that fund the local NGOs. So ultimately, better coordination is needed. I think enhancements on best practices. We've heard a couple of best practices already. And then I think really removing politics and actively choosing to work operationally without silos. And then I think from a transformational perspective, I think really thinking about governance systems of development banks, governance systems of the UN, and really thinking about if we're going to think through decentralized approaches like the nexus, then centralized governance systems need to be changed.
Very good recommendations also to take forward from this, very concrete. I wanted to ask you a quick follow-up, which is not a quick follow-up at all. Giving you one of the harder questions here, which is on the narratives. We were talking yesterday in a number of sessions about narratives and the sorts of narratives we tell in the aid sector that contribute to, fragility and undermine state building and state capacity and civil society. One of the narratives we tend to hear is that, development, it comes to local leadership, development actors will work with the state. Humanitarian actors will prefer generally to work with civil society actors. And specifically for humanitarians, there's this ongoing concern about principles and principled humanitarian action potentially being threatened by working more closely with state actors in contexts like Mali and Yemen. So I wanted to understand from you if that's a narrative that you recognize or agree with. And how do we get the humanitarians to work a bit better with states? And how do we get the development actors to create a more enabling environment for civil society actors? Just in, 1 minute.
Such an easy question. Look, I think I have never heard from any of our members that they do not believe the humanitarian principles. I think that it already exists. If you talk to peace builders, neutrality is the basis of peace builders, right? When you talk to community leaders who are trying to attempt to move forward with their communities and think through peace, neutrality is the basis of trust. The issue with working with states, local organizations have to. They already have relationships with their states. They have to get registration from them. They have to coordinate with them. So the relationship already exists. The relationship where there's the biggest issue is in the international sector. It's where they silo that relationship and they say, we have a relationship with the government. We have a relationship with the international NGOs. We have a relationship with the local actors. So to me, it's just going back to this point of coordination. I think better coordination needs to happen. I think that's important. That's one of the most kind of immediate things that I think can happen.
Finding the areas where different actors can be complementary and then coordinating around that. Great. Thank you, Patty. I want to turn to you now because we hear that some of these best examples of the really innovative work around supporting locally led resilience and disaster response, some of which is now being labeled, because of course there's always a label, survivor and community-led response, SCLR, and you can see some useful resources for that on that resource page. A lot of these are being funded by philanthropic or private foundations rather than traditional donors. Can you talk to us from CDP's perspective about some of the initiatives that you're seeing the philanthropic sector support, and how do these crisscross the typical silos of humanitarian development, and perhaps, dare I say, adding the fourth silo, climate action?
Well, I think first I want to thank the speakers that came before me, just incredibly insightful observations, and keep up like half my notes I can just cross off. Sorry. It's good. We think alike. It's wonderful because that's what it really comes down to, is more of us thinking about the need for change. I guess what I would say, I'll come to the philanthropy point, but if I may for a moment, I think one of the challenges we have is really trust and power. So I mean, coordination, I think, is a nice way of us saying we actually don't trust each other. And we need to get in the room and keep talking about how you're going to convince me that I can trust and believe in you to do something. And that's, one of the key issues that we have, and it's a stumbling block. And I really believe words matter. We need to actually start diagnosing the true problem that's hindering our success. And And I would say also stop hiding behind jargon, right? HDP nexus. I mean, what the hell? I agree. I mean, nobody cares. If I need water, I want water. I don't want to know what sector is responsible for water. So I think this is where we have these incredible challenges that we have organized from the best of intentions to try and coordinate ourselves, build our trust, but they've actually turned into power dynamics. We've created, they've become informational, reputational, positional power centers. And I always think about when I was working on the Interagency Standing Committee, another jargon-filled world. And, we had all these great ideas of how we were going to change things. And when they said, well, what's the mantra? What does this mean? I'm like, be better. That's literally do your job better. That is what we're telling people, but that wasn't enough. We had to create piles and piles and binders of checklists and policies and procedures, which then nobody wanted to do because nobody has time for all this extra stuff. And I'm like, the message is do better. Like, it really is that simple. Like, think about the people in the room with you. Think about where they're coming from. Respect their point of view and listen. And so when you talk about philanthropy, I do want to say, yes, some of philanthropy is doing better. Not all of philanthropy is doing better. So I don't want to let philanthropy get off the hook here and say, oh, they're some wonderful, because they live in their silos too. They love the big development actors. They do the same, or they replace the big development actors. So they've just created an entirely new silo. But I think in terms of how Center for Disaster Philanthropy tries to really approach this issue is exactly where Hiva was going, which is the community doesn't need our silos. They don't want our silos. They don't want our power dynamics. They want the assistance on their terms for the solutions they define. And the way we look at it at CDP, what we guide philanthropy on is to get away from these definitions that are complicated and very much grounded in English, and instead to look at, vulnerability plus hazard equals a disaster. Right? What created the vulnerability? Can you mitigate? Can you stop? Can you prepare for that vulnerability? Not everybody can do that, but some can. That's where root causes. What has created this? What's the hazard? Climate. It's a hazard. War, governance issues. Those are all hazards. Bad infrastructure, bad development, hazard. So how do we look at it that way? And by bringing that equation to philanthropy, it's really enabled a lot of aha moments where they think, well, I do education and I've never thought of it as anything other than schools, but now I can suddenly see actually schools are also, I'll use a US example, well, actually many places, it's freedom from the violence in their home, or it's a meal, or it's a quiet space, or it's a mentor. It's so much more than a place of learning. And so if they look at it in that way and can really see the whole of the individual, the whole of the student, their program becomes so much more creative, more innovative. And they also are able to see that they don't have to do everything. They can go to someone else and say, hey, you do this, come work with me. Let's do it together. And I think we often explore these items where we're so focused on having to be the savior or nothing. And we're not satisfied with just being good enough and doing the best we can, and in concert with everyone else, and thus helping the communities raise themselves up. And I can give more examples, but I'll stop there for now.
Point. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Patty. I'm going to go back to our online panelists and ask all three of you a similar question, the same question on resilience, because we've been talking a lot about resilience at the Fragility Forum as well. And you all work in that intersection or area that could probably come with the label resilience, whatever that means. Is this an area where you're seeing more development in humanitarian collaboration? Is it a fruitful opportunity for talking about nexus issues? And what would you recommend to DFIs, development finance initiatives, and humanitarian donors on how they can better support local leaders in their resilience work, where that's currently noted as a gap, potentially? So we'll start with Secretary General Maiga.
Thank you very much. I think one of the issues that we encounter as a country in a very fragile context is the fact that the conflicts has just added to the already fragile situation that has been caused by the climate change and desertification. As you know, for example, two-thirds of Mali is the desert, and the climate change has bring about a situation where the river, which is the Niger River, which is one of the longest river in West Africa, has shrunk to less than 1/3 of its width and length and of its width. So people who have been living around these lakes, around these wetlands, they have lost their livelihood, and they have and there is strife around pasture, around grazing area. So that have brought about a lot of conflict between the population the population themselves. And that's also one of the reasons why we have these tensions and these conflicts among the group. So what we need to do is to make sure that in the process of assisting the people who have been affected by the conflict, we also address the situation of the negative effects of climate change, and have a holistic approach toward assisting those vulnerable population. And this is why I think it's very important that this idea of breaking the barriers, breaking the silos is very important, and trying to see what is the situation of this population as a whole. It's not just that they are affected by the conflict, but they are also affected by the adverse effects of the climate change. And in and helping them, we should also take into account also this situation. Because even if we address the issue of conflict, we solve the conflicts, but the root cause of the conflict sometimes, which is the effect of the climate change, the shrinking of the land, the fight over grazings is still there, and the conflict will really will come back. So I think this strategy that I think we should address in addressing the humanitarian situation in Mali.
And can I just come back, Secretary John Maigon, what would you recommend for development finance or humanitarian donors on better supporting this kind of necessary, very important resilience work financially, from a financial mechanism perspective?
I think what I recommend is, to make through this concept of localization. I think it's very important that local actors are put in the driving seat. The capacities of the local actors are being strengthened, because we always people say, oh no, the local actors, they don't have the capacities. But unless you help them strengthen their capacities, they will never be able to have the capacities. But they are like the Red Cross. We are the organization on the ground. Like I said, in 2/3 of the country, no other organization right now is there. It's only the Red Cross. When these groups have overtaken the land, the only organization that have remained on the ground is the Red Cross. Even the government have pulled out. So if we really want to touch the livelihood of the population, we have to strengthen the capacities and of these local actors like the Red Cross.
And connecting that to something that we were hearing this morning from the G7 Plus group on the hurdles that states and governments in fragile settings face in accessing climate finance, which has lots of processes for approval. They were making very similar points around, it's a risk aversion, right, to working with states, to working with local actors, that the international financial architecture really has to get its head around, how we rethink and redefine risk and de-risk these approaches. Ms. Ali, your reflections on this from the Somalia context, and which has been obviously a huge focus on resilience work, and what your recommendations are similarly for the finance piece to better support that.
I mean, I think it was Hirak who said that. I mean, we need to deconstruct what all these words mean, right? Like resilience, development, nexus, all of these things. Ultimately, we want to see people living and being able to work and send their children to school and live in peace and not be afraid of or conflict zones. All of these things mean we actually need to ask, what is the point of the interventions that we are doing in developing countries? In the case of Somalia, I mean, we have seen progress in some corners, but not, the progress that the government is looking for or has been seeking. I think one of the things that I would recommend is for partners to not, I mean, in addition to working with local actors, work closely and more imperatively with national and local governments, because ultimately what we are trying to do is to ensure that, it's governments that deliver these services across the board and in conjunction with local partners and localization. We cannot sort of assume that programming that is done in, Nairobi, London, Washington, whatever, is going to really mean what, a small town in Somalia requires. So understanding that need actually is paramount before we can see changes happen. Co-planning and giving governments lead in terms of identifying and telling partners and donors where and what needs to be done should be prioritized. If we're talking about building resilience, you can't build resilience based on humanitarian interventions, which is what we have seen in Somalia for the last 30, 40 years. What we need is to really, I mean, in light of climate crisis that we are seeing in Somalia, that has exacerbated an already challenging environment, ad hoc interventions does not work. The government has a development plan, institutions are there. There's a lot of jargons that get used, lack of capacity, lack of coordination. Yes, those things exist, but they are not a defining issue in terms of addressing the problems. It's the lack of sort of willingness I found working in Somalia for the past decade or so, and being Somali on top of that, there is the resistance to actually allow the local partners or local governments and national governments to build that resilience, to be able to be those who are responsible, for improving the conditions on the ground. We have to hand over the responsibility to the people who are affected and not really presume we are the, when I say we, I'm talking about Western actors and international partners that presume, their interventions supersede.
Thank you. And we'll go to Dr. Ahmad Haji for a quick response on this as well. And then we'll see if there's questions or comments in the room. If you want to raise a hand.
Thank you. To be more focused on resilience and climate change in conflict situation, and also alignment with the Nexus Yemen initiative, that we also concern about climate change as intersectoral and mainstreaming to all of the intervention that Nexus programming should be done. We believe ignoring the effect of climate change will lead to waste of resources, and as a recommendation to better support local leaders in their resilience work, I would recommend it the following to the Development Finance Initiative and humanitarian donors. To be mainstreaming climate change adaptation by integrating climate change adaptation into resilience building effort, focus on integrated approach, which can address multi-dimensional challenge faced by fragile communities more effectively, such in Yemen, invest in local capacities by supporting their leaderships and institutions, so we ensure resilience efforts, flexible and long funding terms, strengthening the partnerships. So as conclusion, that supporting resilience in fragile settings require close collaboration between development and humanitarian actors, along with focus on climate change agenda that will contribute more in building resilient communities and fostering sustainable development in fragile settings such in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Are there questions in the room? We have a few more questions as well, but I want to offer the opportunity to anyone who has questions or comments. We have 10 minutes. Yep, back there. And do you mind leaning over so we can get your question in the mic? Sorry, the mics are only on the table.
Matt Scott with World Vision. couldn't agree more that we need to shake off these silos that we're lamenting. So how do we do it? So Hibak very passionately articulated, I think, what all of us feel. The people that we're trying to stand in solidarity with do not care about any of these categories, HDP or N or any other letter of the alphabet, but our donors do. The people with the money, I should say our institutional donors do. I'm in private fundraising, and private donors don't care about those labels either. People who want to respond to people in need don't care what sector titles you use, what your expertise is. Like, what are you doing to stand with people in Gaza or Syria earthquake or wherever the situation is? So I'm hearing, again, a lot of lament that these categories are impeding us. I heard some spicy comments yesterday from the ICRC president saying humanitarianism is a distraction. Like, that category itself is pulling us away from the agility, the flexibility that we need as a sector. So how do we shake off these silos? My question. Like, we're lamenting them, we're naming them. Yep. Okay, let's go the next step.
It's kind of a follow-up to the question, but maybe even a contribution, right? Because I'm from Sinaloa, it's a state in the north of Mexico. If you know of El Chapo, you know of Sinaloa. So it's a conflict region, right? And now that I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I participate in these forums, and I hear a lot of very highly developed concepts, what I sometimes feel is missing is really the voice of the local actors, right? And although I cannot speak of myself as a person that has been affected by the conflict there, I know a lot of people, right? And I now feel kind of a responsibility to talk about their experiences, about family members who have migrated, who have been vulnerable. And I think it goes back to what our panelist from Somalia was saying, that even what is discussed in Nairobi might not represent a village in Somalia. And I think part of that solution is just making sure more spaces are created to give the voice to those local actors, because maybe the development and humanitarian community will follow once they really learn more about those contexts and those experiences and what people really care about, and not just what this very sophisticated framework and system that has been built. And unfortunately, it has been built in English for people with a lot of education because they have access to those resources. But I feel it's a collective responsibility to make sure those voices are centered, the locally based organizations.
Thank you. And Erica, do you want to, you might have to get a bit closer to the mic, unfortunately, sorry.
That's fine. Thanks very much. My name is Erica Mason, and I'm representing FCDO, UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And I just wanted to say that I think that these are really great provocations. The UK government has committed to scoping and delivering a resilience and adaptation fund, so cross-nexus funding in the next 5 years, 150 million a year, to build resilience in fragile and conflict-affected states. And one of the things that we keep talking about in relation to this fund is how do we deliver quality funding at scale to the local level. And by quality funding, I mean where local actors are key decision makers, and that's multi-year funding so that there can be a real development gains and the preservation of those gains when crisis threatens them. I think that for us, it would be really helpful, and please do approach me at the end of this meeting, because we want to hear what's working in these contexts, what isn't working in these contexts. And it's not just about this program in general, this fund, but it's also about thinking about whole systems change. And there are multiple departments within the FCBO that are interested in this work. So just to plead, I mean, I know a lot of this research is out there, and I know, like, I've been sitting on panels for the last few days listening to this, and I feel like I get it, like, who does these silos on the ground, but overcoming a lot of those systemic, issues that you've just described, I think are really, it would be useful to hear from you what you think works. So just to put that out there.
Great, thank you, Erica. I'm going to go to you first, Patty. How do we shake off the silos?
Thanks for that. Well, I guess I would ask Emily, our FCDO colleague, is who are you funding? Erica, sorry, who are you funding through?
Sorry,
who are you funding through?
International Climate Finance.
No, I'm just saying, so shaking off the silos is changing who we finance, changing who we fund.
Oh, you mean who is the funding going to?
Yeah, so I mean, about like what we're doing at CDP is we're finding national organizations, national consortia, and we're funding them. We're going directly to the source, and some of them have better capacity than others, and so they're creating, like a network to enable funding of others. So it really is about trying to figure out how do you get as close as possible to the populations and their solutions. But the scale, which is another thing that's always being explored, how are we going to scale for impact and sustainability? We should just strike those words from every one of our proposals, because those are hidden words to say why we're not going to fund you directly, because we can't give enough out quick enough. It's not sustainable because you haven't proven it to us yet, and we've got very, very stringent proving paths. My question is, why does it need to have all of that? Why do we need to have impact and sustainability forever? Isn't it enough to actually know that for the next few years, for this family, something has changed? We're always looking for that solution that's forever. And that we have to look at the negative drivers that stop us from actually doing what we know we need to do, because we know what we have to do. We don't need any more evidence. We know. It's just a lot harder, a lot slower, and a lot more complicated to do.
Thank you. I'm going to go back online for your reactions and responses.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think much of it is to do with control, right? A lot of control-focused interventions. And so long that is the truth, and we're not ready to address that, we're going to keep going in circles. Because I mean, I've worked for the municipality of Mogadishu for 4 years prior to my current role, addressing displacement that was really, and I mean, it still continues to grow incredibly, and impossible to get partners and donors to actually support work that was actually proving that it was moving the metrics in terms of housing and protection and health, because it wasn't being controlled within, you know, those of you who are familiar with Somalia, in Halane, the international corridors. And that is an issue that we have to really head on, because so long as headquarters want to remain in control of every ounce of intervention, by the time you get back an answer, it's 6 months, 8 months down the road, and therefore you got 4 months left to implementation, and therefore the project will not continue. Those are the realities on the ground. And if we're talking about moving things, we have to let some of that control go and trust that people on the ground understand what they're doing.
Thank you, Ms. Ali. Secretary General Maiga, I want to go to you for any reactions, reflections to the questions, as well as any final key message that you'd like to share the group on ways that we can shake off these silos. I know if Secretary General Maiga might have, oh, he's there? Great. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, my mic was off. Yeah, I think we are in the right path. The only thing that we need to do is to coordinate more and do more advocacy on behalf of the nexus. And if we do that, and also, as I said, if we think of the local actors as those who can make a big difference in assisting in providing delivering the assistance to the population, then and also trying to address, as I said, the humanitarian assistance delivery in a holistic way. Then I think we will be in the years to come. I think the situation will change. And today, I'm sure if we conduct an evaluation on the nexus concepts, humanitarian development and peace concepts, I think we have not gone very far. We have not gone very far because our donors and also the partners, they believe in the concept, but in terms of funding the trend, instead of funding, having a holistic way of funding the concept, is very difficult. Today in my country, for example, it's just emergency. You know, wherever you go, the fund that is just for emergency. ECHO, European Union, they just fund the emergency, not the development, not peace building. So unless, you know, we concentrate on that, then it's very difficult to achieve, you know, nexus objective. Thank you. Siloed
mechanisms. Yes, thank you. And Dr. Ahmad Haji, a final key message from you.
The most important key messages is to strengthen partnerships between local actors, civil society, government, development, to finance initiatives. Collaboration and coordination is the most important one to ensure that coherent for effective support and resilience buildings. I'm also want to say that in Yemen, because the diversity and the community by themselves trying to rebuild their lives by initiative solutions, so that to make them more self-resilient, it will be more impact. So as I mentioned before, that we was in humanitarian, but we notice as a civil society that we practice nexus. So we need just coordination and supports to be as a quality. Now we have to search about quality of interventions. So this is what should be done in the futures, in the coming futures. Thank you.
Focusing on quality and impact over which category it fits into. Great. And Hibak, final word on what you think we need to do to shake down the silos. What would you like to see a year from now to support more nexus work?
No, I think it's Holden made a really good point, and Patty did too, around control and power, right? It's really about letting go. Risk exists with every single institution. Every institution messes up. It's very clear, but it's all perceived, right? Risk is higher with one group than the other. So it's just about letting go and funding initiatives that we know work, supporting groups that are really interested in supporting communities and figuring out how to do that based on their context, and stop worrying about kind of this perceived risk and this centralized system, and start using the money that we have, the limited money that we have, in supporting efforts that we know where lives can be saved, where peace can happen, where development can happen. And to me, it's that simple.
Yeah. I think an earlier session today talked about embracing discomfort. Yeah. Embracing discomfort and decentralization. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for joining us online and in the room. And if you have resources, I think I mentioned this at the outset, that look at local leadership and the nexus that you would like us to add to that resource page, please do reach out to us or send us an email, and we're happy to add that to the resource hub. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, I know there's a point.